Okay, so this is Dr. Mitchell again, and for this ergogenic aid, we're going to talk about blood doping. And this may be one that you've probably heard of a little bit more in athletics and performance. And blood doping obviously has to deal with altering blood. More specifically, when we talk about blood doping, we're talking about increasing red blood cell count. Now, the old school way to do this, I guess if there's an old school way, would be if we wanted to increase your red blood cell count, we would take some of your blood, take however much to a small extent of that, freeze it, and then days before whatever event you wanted to do, typically obviously more of a long distance event, we would then infuse that same blood, your blood, back into you so that we would see a momentary, usually lasts about a week or so, increase in red blood cell count. Now, you may look at that and be like, well, gosh, that's not cheating. There's no drug involved. That's just your own blood. And you'd be right. And that is kind of the old school way of doing it. Now, there are issues with that. Red blood cells do get damaged. They lose some of their shape. We see stark increases in not just red blood cell count, but with that, increases in viscosity of the blood, altering blood pressure. And if you are exercising at really high pressures, which is common during activity, that can be a real issue. So that's kind of the old school way. In the 1900s, we discovered EPO. Actually, we discovered that way back in 1906. But it was in the 80s that we were able to isolate EPO, which is erythropoietin, which is a hormone, technically an enzyme, that is the cause of the stimulation of red blood cell development. EPO plays other roles in the body, actually causes vasodilation, particularly in the coronary arteries, affects other tissues as well. And so we actually isolated EPO. We actually created synthetic EPO back in 1989. And its use then became very popular and illegal, not surprisingly, a little cleaner than infusing your own blood. And you could see the same responses in red blood cell count. So EPO, not surprisingly, used a lot more in endurance sports. And I'll also tell you, there's a decent amount of research out there in EPO because it is also a common treatment in other blood disorders. We see it in some chronic kidney diseases, some bone marrow issues. Using EPO as a therapeutic intervention is actually quite common. And so there's decent research out there. And how EPO works and again, we should all understand this from cardiovascular system. If we're going to increase red blood cell count, we then increase the ability we have to carry oxygen through the blood to tissues that need them. And so if we can carry more oxygen is available for cells to formulate ATP aerobically, and therefore we can improve performance. Not surprisingly, this is also why individuals who may have low red blood cell count, those who are anemic, this can be very, very helpful. Now, EPO, again, like I said, plays a role in a lot of other tissues in the body. In fact, I'll tell you, there's good research out there that EPO affects central nervous system, may even improve wakefulness and focus, which is not necessarily something we think of when we think of EPO, but it is really, its use has been more in the athletic realm. And there's been evidence, particularly in endurance cycling, where we've seen its use quite extensively, though not the only environment, its use quite extensively. And this graph here is kind of the old school version of blood doping, where we would take some of your blood and then some amount of time before you want to have your performance, whether it's an Olympic Games or something, we infuse that blood. We see your hemoglobin counts increase quite extensively. And as time goes on, what we'll see is then your body will bring those levels down to normal, but it does take quite a while. Now, this graph shows this being extensive amount of weeks. And typically, this window is a little bit shorter than that, but something, in theory, that would work. And I will tell you, there's very, very, very good evidence this works. We see increases in red blood cell count, hemoglobin. In regards to performance, we see sizable, about upwards of 5% improvements in VO2 max. Not surprisingly, as we can imagine, that will improve many types of aerobic performance. and really good evidence that this definitely works. There is a negative side. First off, use of EPO and blood doping is banned. And even synthetic EPO, which there are ways to mask that, has been banned and has been banned for years. And there's always obviously the concern about when we're dealing with blood, other bloodborne antigens and things like that. Though nowadays a little less of an issue. That's something we want to be concerned about. Having said that, this is still probably one of the most well-known means to improve aerobic performance, and that's one of the keys here. Is we're really not talking about sprint performance or jumping. We're not talking about improving muscle strength. We're really talking about improving oxygen carrying capacity, which not surprisingly is really viable in just endurance type events, long distance running, cross country skiing, where we've actually seen it, cycling, swimming, places like that. So that's blood doping. We will see you in the next video.